see if we're working yet. Test, test. Can everybody hear me okay? All right. And in the way back row, can somebody give me a thumbs up if you can hear? Okay, very good. Well, thank you, Amy, for that nice welcome and the opportunity to present on a topic. I don't want to say it's dear to my heart because I hate bad guys, but I do know a little bit about counterfeiting and have been trained to be a professional witness, expert witness in the manufacturing of genuine currency. So I spent most of my adult life in one way or another, and still to this day, affiliated with the Secret Service. I grew up in the big town of Fairfax, Minnesota, and I just want to welcome all of them. I started out in the Secret Service as what they called a stay-in-school clerk because foolishly, or maybe not, because this story has a happy ending for me, I followed the love of my life down to the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque to go to school. And what I quickly found out is that tuition for out-of-state students is 3 times what it is for in-state students. So I had to kind of take a step back and get about 3 jobs, and finally got one with the Secret Service. And when I showed up that day for the interview, because I did not know where I was going, it was just an office job, and I saw that sign on the door, you can imagine my shock and amazement. But what I ended up doing was some administrative work for them initially, answering phones, talking to the banks, receiving the counterfeit currency that the banks were bringing over to us, and through the mentorship of the personnel there, I got to learn about counterfeit investigations. As I was getting ready to graduate and start a career as an elementary school teacher, my boss approached me and said, I really think you should take the Treasury Enforcement Agent exam. I think you probably do really well as an agent. And of course, I was thrilled that he saw that in me because I sure didn't think I could be like one of those guys. And so I took the test. There were 6 of us, 3 passed, 1 got hired. I worked in our Albuquerque office first and then was transferred to Washington, D.C., where I spent the remainder of my career. In total, I did about 32 years of service to the government, starting as a student and ending as a assistant special agent in charge, which if you look at GS scales or know anything about that, that means there was a GS 15. I was very blessed to have that job and continue to be blessed in the fact that after a short break from the service, I got called to see if I would run the nonprofit organization that supports the men and women of the Secret Service. And so if you looked up at the table today, you saw a baseball hat and a shirt. Well, the group that I right now am running, the nonprofit organization, we're the only ones authorized to put the Secret Service star on goods. And we can sell them so that people can buy them. And the proceeds go to help the men and women of the Secret Service in the time of need. So if there's a death in the family, a death of one of our employees, we can immediately cut a check to them to help with whatever expenses they have. So that is a little bit of background about what I've done, where I've been, and you're probably asking, well, how does a kid from Fairfax, Minnesota get involved in a law enforcement career? And so I brought a little prop today to kind of demonstrate how that could have happened. It started in the 5th grade. And one of the girls who was selected to go to the Legion's patrol camp wasn't able to go, and I guess I was the next best choice, so I got to go. And it really resonated with me. What I really enjoyed was the fact that they taught me how to put hospital corners on beds, and later that became a part of my life. So anyways, today I want to acknowledge some special guests who are here. First and foremost, we have the Honorable Kathleen Backer, the Mayor of New Ulm. So thank you. father-in-law, who are brand new residents of New Ulm, are joining us today, and they've probably heard a little bit of this stuff too much, so if they doze off, just help. And I see my Uncle Jerry and Darla in the crowd here, and I just want to recognize both of them because they've been great mentors with regard to this program. My Uncle Jerry, who for years has given tours on the 3rd floor here with the U.S. Dakota War exhibits, as well as at Fort Ridgely and Birch Coulee State Park. You might also know that there is a distant relative named Joseph LaFramboise, and he is the family expert on his story and often shares that with people. Through Darla, I've got to learn so much about what's in the archives here, and I'm so appreciative because she lets me come in and help her and dig through files. I tell her opening some of the boxes here is like Christmas. You never know what you're going to find down there. So anyways, I dare any of you to try to challenge her because as a lifelong New Ulm resident, she knows a lot. So if you've been on one of her cemetery tours, you know and enjoy her. So the last little acknowledgement I want to give is to my high school English teacher who is in the audience today. And I'm going to apologize and do my disclaimer at the beginning, Mr. Zellman, because I know you did your best with me. If there's any misuse of pronouns as adjectives or other bad grammar, you can
grammar was bad, but your term was...
All right. So, how did we even come up with this topic? I volunteer here on Wednesdays, and I call it Wednesdays with Wally. Wally doesn't know that, but that's what I call it. This is Wally in the front row. And Wally assists in the archives along with Darla, and one day found an interesting article about counterfeiting. And so we kind of jumped on that and read about it and realized it had some local characters here, from Essig and Searles and Sleepy Eye, and even a Fairfax connection when we dug in a little further. Wally has really gone off to the races. He's found me pictures. In a little while I'm going to pass around what looks like, what is samples of some of the currency that the local banks could print before we had a national standard. So you'll be able to look at that. And I'm not sure Wally provided this, but on the back side is Leavenworth Prison in Kansas. So it's a friendly reminder in case anybody gets any ideas. Wally has found those photos, pictures of the banks, and then I reached out to our Secret Service archivists, Mike and Jason, who I've known for about 20 years, and they loved it. They went into the National Archives and pulled some information. They provided pictures of the operatives that worked the cases, and also gave me some sentencing documents and those kind of things, which you're going to see throughout the presentation. So, without further ado, I want you to close your eyes a minute and travel back in time to April 14th, 1865. Does anybody know what happened that day? The young man in the green shirt. Yes, sir. Correct. You are correct. It is also the auspicious day that the Secret Service was talked or spoken into existence, not because of the assassination attempt, but because Abraham Lincoln, in talking with his administration, decided we needed to come up with some sort of entity in the government that could combat all the counterfeit currency that's in circulation. And therefore, he had his team working on it. So, let's see here, let me advance my PowerPoint slide. There we go. So, on July 5th of 1865, after the country had kind of settled into what was going to be our new normal after the loss of President Lincoln, the Secret Service was established. They had a headquarters in Washington, D.C., and then 11 little district offices throughout the country. Our original mission, as I mentioned, was to combat the counterfeit currency, because as much as 1/3 of it was fake at the time. And that's because the country was so disconnected that every state was coming up with its own currency. And I'll start this, maybe over here, Wally, just to kind of give you an example of what some of that currency might have looked like, genuine. But then people use this to create some counterfeit. On July 5th, July 14th, we got our first director. His name is William Wood, and we've named a conference room after him at our headquarters. And within about a year, the operatives captured more than 200 counterfeiters and destroyed multiple counterfeit plants. And by doing so, they quickly stabilized our country's economy and our financial security. So we are celebrating our 160th anniversary this year, and some of that material is part of our heritage. The agency continued to evolve, and with the assassination of President William McKinley, Congress decided to pass legislation and actually put money towards the Secret Service providing presidential protection. So he was assassinated in 1901. 1906, we get the responsibility to protect presidents. In 1922, they created a White House police force to protect the president while at the White House and the White House itself. That eventually turned into what we now call the U.S. Secret Service Uniform Division. And you'll see those officers around the White House if you ever are in Washington, D.C. So let's take a look at some of the characters that we're going to talk about today. So the first is Raymond Marty, and to my knowledge, he has no connection to our local Marty family that we could find. Mr. Marty was born in 1903. He dies in 1972. For most of his life, he lives in Mankato, but he worked at the Sleepy Eye Herald Dispatch in 1923 to 1929 as a reporter and kind of the handyman at the newspaper. He was very well thought of by his boss and coworkers, and a little later I'm going to read you an excerpt from his boss, who kind of makes an appeal when it comes to sentencing for him. At a certain point, he and his boss at the Sleepy Eye Herald go to Fairfax, and they attempt to buy the Fairfax Standard paper. But apparently the price was not right that they offered, so they gave up that idea, and allegedly he opens a general store in Fairfax, although I could not find any history on that, and I spoke to a couple of our local resident experts there, so more research to be done. He eventually returns to the Mankato area. He gets married, he has 4 children, and his mother-in-law, who's also dependent on him for support. The next characters that you'll meet are Emil and William Winkleman. And Emil was born in 1897 in Cobden, Minnesota. He died in 1960 at the young age of 63. His parents were Friedrich or Fritz and Frederica, maiden name Novak. I have information he served in World War I and is buried at Fort Snelling. He was married in 1919 to Elda Jeske, and they had 2 children. He worked at a bank in Sleepy Eye in Essig as both a cashier and later as the bank president. So he knew a lot about genuine currency and how it's made, and because the Secret Service had talked with many of the bankers and law enforcement, as they've done as part of their mission, he knew what counterfeit currency looked like, and maybe some of the ways you could, excuse me, get around it being detected. All right, and then next up is William Winkleman. And he appears to have been a bachelor most of his life, older than his younger brother. He never married, and so he had the responsibility of taking care of their aging mother and lived with her at their home in Springfield. He worked at a bank up until the time he enlisted in the U.S. Army. It says in one article I found that he was a teller at the First National Bank. And then after he comes back from the Army, he has a few odd jobs, but then he gets back into banking. So those are the characters on the counterfeiting side when they show you their place of employment. And as we were kind of greeting people today when we came in, I had the honor of meeting Mr. Roloff, who is sitting in the row back here, if you want to raise your hand. And he has a really fun connection to today's story, I found out. So would you like to share what that is, sir?
The bank became the post office. When the post office closed, it was a small building, roof was not good, and the real estate market in Essing in the early 70s was not real good. So I purchased that building. It was managed to salvage the bank vault and doors and the decorative type of thing. So I have a collection there, heavier than vault doors, unbelievably. Anyhow, I have that stuff.
Yes, sir.
When I was a young kid, there was a grocery store in Fairfax run by Alfred Marty and Oscar Boy.
Oh,
I
well,
don't
there
know
you
if there's a
go.
connection between that and the first one you started with, but I remember that from my
Okay.
childhood.
Well, we'll have to look into that a little further. Yes, sir.
From 1932 to 1933 and 1934, my dad rented a farm from the boys' mother
Okay.
and became acquainted with the boys. And when they were apprehended in 1933, fall of 1933, Dad didn't have a rent paid yet, so everything was locked up. He was able to get that released by of an attorney, and then in the spring of 1934, one of the boys helped Dad plant corn. He came back to Springfield after his incarceration and became an electrician in Springfield.
Very good. Thank you. Filling in some missing blanks here. And sir, what was your name?
Willard Van Anger.
Nice to meet you, Willard.
And
Thank
of
you.
course, the Runts were neighbors. You know more about it than I do.
Well, very good. I love it. I love it. It never ceases to amaze me when you start to tell a story. Everybody has a little piece of it, so that's great. I'm going to show you now our operatives. So down in the St. Louis district, where eventually the Winklemans are apprehended, is Operative Carl Dixon. And I just found out this morning that Carl, at about this time, made $2,700 in salary for the year. And his boss was the operative in charge, Leo Schmugai. So I'm blocking his head, but if you guys can see him. And then in our own St. Paul district, we had Grady Boatwright. And Grady, as the operative in charge, made $3,200 for the year, and Mr. Schmugai was making $3,300 per year. And so I asked our archivist, what kind of training did they have back in those days? And back in the day, it was mostly on-the-job training. Many of them had their own personal job background to rely on, prior police, detective, or military experience. I believe it's Mr. Boatwright who actually worked for the Pinkertons. So he did have some formal training, and I have some more on him when it comes to their retirement. I can fill you in on. The newly appointed were learning on the fly, doing a lot of administrative work. I can attest to that, still happens. They're given investigative cases and said, see what you can make of this dog. And that's how it starts. They did not have an official office automobile at that time, so they relied on public transportation, bicycles, or other people's automobiles. these days, if you were to give your spouse, your child, or anybody who's not either a bad guy or a coworker a ride in your car, you get a nice vacation without pay. So don't misuse the government vehicles. And then the operative, in terms of the firearms proficiency, would either get a weapon from the office or purchase one themselves. And many times it was the postal inspector who had the most experience and would train them in on weapons tactics. Now today, training is a little different. You first have to go through a thorough background, which many of the lovely people from Fairfax might have had the opportunity to meet some of our Minneapolis agents. I know that Jan Carey had a knock on her door as they were doing my background. They talked to our town librarian, Carol Thompson, to make sure that I wasn't taking out inappropriate books. What is she interested in reading? I was very relieved when the only bad thing they found was the time I jumped the fence and went swimming after hours. So they bring all the agent candidates and uniform division candidates to Washington, D.C., and they do a week-long introductory course with them. And at that time, you're given a PT test to make sure you meet all the requirements. If you can't meet them there, you're sent home. After that, you go for 19 weeks at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Glencoe, Georgia, or there's also one in Artesia, New Mexico. Then you do a week at our National Computer Forensics Institute, because so much is done on the computer these days. They want to make sure that everyone is trained on how to do that and can be an expert witness in a court of law. This institute also trains many of our local and state law enforcement officers on how to conduct searches on computers. And then you come to Beltsville, Maryland area by the NASA Goddard Space Institute, and you spend 21 weeks at Secret Service Academy. And while you're there, they're going to train you in the use of all the firearms that are in our arsenal. They are going to test you and teach you our specific jurisdictions under 18 U.S.C. 3056, which gives us our authority. They take you on a tour of the Bureau of Engraving and Printing so you can see how genuine currency is made. They also take you to Arlington National Cemetery, lest we forget who we're working with and what we're working for as we take our oath of office. They also take us to the Holocaust Museum so that we know what it looks like and we learn from history. We go to the African American Museum, and then finally Ford's Theater, where this story begins, with a reenactment of the assassination, and then a little give and take with the candidates to say, what would you have done differently here? I will say the day that Abraham Lincoln went to Ford's Theater, he had a Metropolitan Police constable with him who decided the President and First Lady are securely in their theater box. I'm gonna go check out the local brewery or pub and just make sure everything's okay over there. Maybe have a glass of beer, and that's what I did. So, all right. So, how is it even possible that the Winklemans and Mr. Marty were able to pass counterfeit currency after they had done such a good job of cleaning it all up? Well, the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 is what created a national currency, but because the government couldn't produce it fast enough to get it into circulation, they allowed some of the larger private banks to issue currency using the Federal Reserve's basic design. And so if they did one of those notes, the bank name was printed, on the left-hand side, where we see the Federal Reserve seal today. This was the stopgap measure until they had enough in circulation. And then once they did, that was discontinued, and then all the notes bear the 1929 design up until about the 90s when they started adding security features into it. And then in 1996, if you recall, they gave us the currency with the big heads. So that was part of it. So I'm going to read a little bit of a story then to you about this and how it got started. And this research was done by one of our other volunteers, Carla Fergerdi? Val? Okay, if I'm pronouncing it right. And so I can't take credit for this story, but it gives you a taste of kind of what happened here. So the three gentlemen, two working at the bank, Emil and William, one in Essig and one in Searles, had a friend named Raymond Marty, who in addition to being a reporter was also a gifted artist, but he was now unemployed. And I guess walked into one of the banks and said to Emil, "Do you have any suggestions for me on how I can make some money?" So old Emil took out a $10 bill and said, "I know you're an artist. What do you think? Do you think we can make some of these?" So I'm not sure where they had this conversation in the bank, but anyways, that's where it apparently occurred. So Emil didn't really know beans about the process, but he visited the library, checked out some books on photography and engraving, and read up on the process because now he's part of this training that bank employees are receiving. Let's see, Emil made the plates, and then Marty printed them because he knew from his days at the newspaper how they could work the printing press. And if you haven't seen them, and I wish I had examples back in the old days, we used to get a kit that had examples of what an engraving plate looked like, but it's a piece of metal, and it has the format of the bill laid out on it, and then they just put it on the drum and they start printing. And we don't often, to this day, find any of those cases still where they're using a real printing press. Most of it's done on computers now. But at one point, I guess Emil confronted an employee at the Essig Bank and said to them, do you think somebody would ever print one of these? And held up a $10 bill. And his bank employee said, "Well, Emil, anybody can try something like that, maybe once. But who would be the damn fool to try something like that?" And they had a good laugh at it. But little did he know, Emil was doing it right under their noses. He actually kept some of the counterfeit in the safe that Mr. Roloff now has in the bank. And on the weekends, because times were tough, there were children to feed, everybody needed a job, they would go out to different towns and states and start passing the counterfeit money. Let's see here. They did weekend trips, and this continued for about a year until the Essig Bank closed in about May of 1932. And then they moved the whole operation over to Mankato in October. And that's when Emil's brother kind of joined in, William joined in. So they stepped up the operation, added a second press, and their intention was to cut Marty out of the profits. However, Emil and William didn't know how to operate the press, so there was a little bit of a flaw with their program, their plan. So part of what they would do is before they passed the bills, they would rub them with yellow crayon to make them look tinged and a little older, and they'd rub them together to make them look worn. Their goal wasn't to make a ton of money, but they wanted to be comfortable enough, in fact, that they could live for 2 or 3 years. And they kept saying, "Oh, we'll just stop after 6 months or so." Well, they passed these bills in both North and South Dakota, Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri, Wisconsin, and even went all the way to the West Coast. Now the officials of the government were getting suspicious, of course, because as the banks eventually received this counterfeit money and then turned it into the Secret Service, they started to set people up in some of these small towns near where the passes had occurred in the hopes that they might actually catch them in the act. So talk about a long surveillance, lots of time spent in man hours. So, this is just records that the Secret Service found of the passing of the notes in Kansas, San Francisco, St. Louis, and St. Paul. Over also in Omaha, where they got the Fargo National Bank note. And then, that's the Omaha note. And then here you see on the screen examples. This is what they call the gold note, gold for the gold seal. And this is where they would take the yellow crayon and scribble on it to give it that yellow color. This one, according to the records, we put the denomination, you know, their check letter, faceplate number, backplate number, the series of the bill, and then how it was printed, who was the maker, where was the plant, and when did they find this. This here is an example of a note that was drawn on the Fargo National Bank, according to, not really, but according to what they created. And then we have two more of these notes, and this one was drawn on Minneapolis, and as well as this one. So as soon as these notes start appearing, they start to try to connect all the dots, and it wasn't long before word had spread throughout the towns on these. And at this point, I would like to ask, I have this very expensive counterfeit detection tool with me today. I'm going to pass them around and ask that you each take one, and then if you have a dollar bill, I prefer 20s myself, but if you have some money with you today, pull out one of those bills, and then we'll let you do a little test on it here. And I'll explain, there's two of them there. If you guys want to take them and just pass them around, and I'm going to grab up. Yeah, very expensive, this broke my budget. And there's 100 of them, so I don't know if somebody takes more than one.
What's the most
$20.
popular one that is counterfeited the most?
I'm so glad you asked that. The question was, what denomination is counterfeited the most? Does anybody have a guess?
$100 bill.
20.
Okay, by 0.6%, the $20 bill beats out the $100 bill in being passed. And that's because it's the most common, right? We still, a $100 bill, as rich as everyone is these days, still brings more attention to it than a 20. So, and I'm glad you guys are paying attention and asking those kind of questions, because I forgot to mention there is a quiz at the end. So as you get your paper clip and you have your piece of currency out, back in the 1929 era, and while this was going on, one of the only security features that was in the bills was red and blue security fibers, or fibers. And they weren't even called security fibers. They were just part of the recipe used to make the genuine currency paper. And so, does anybody know what genuine currency is actually made of, or tries to? Linen, yeah, and cotton, yeah. And I'm sure you can Google it and find what the percentage is. But they use that recipe, and then they throw in some red and blue fibers and put it on the big vats and crank out the paper. And they did take us to Albany, New York to see how that was done as part of our training as well. All right. So the design on the top here is an example of the 1929 Federal Reserve note. And this pretty much stays true till 1990. And then we get to 1996 when the big heads are introduced. And then in 2004, they do another style design change and add in security threads. and other features here that we'll cover in just a minute. I'm not sure if the paper clips have made it around to those who want to try, but what you can do is wrap your paper clip and then take it and see if you can find a fiber on your bill and lift that fiber off of the bill. And I promise you, you're not going to get arrested for defacing U.S. currency. But if you look and see, it's usually the very tip of the paper clip you can use. And you can pick off one of the red or blue fibers. Yeah, just take the tip of that, just like if you were making some of your case. I'll just walk up and down each row, and if you want to pass your bills towards me, just kidding. I can collect it and make sure it's not counterfeit. I promise I'll give it back. But let me see if I can.
See if it doesn't yield.
Show you. So maybe right over here, there's a blue flag.
Take
Lift it up and over. Where you see a red or blue fiber.
You know, it's amazing is how tough these are.
No.
Put pipe for washing all the time. Holds up. You're blind.
So if you look up at this screen here, you see one of the Federal Reserve notes from the 1929 series. And then they magnify just this little area up here, and what you can see is embedded in there are the little red and blue fibers. And that's what you might be able to pick out of your note. It's very hard for counterfeiters to duplicate that.
Is it always the same in every one?
No, they're random patterns. Yes. So, it's very difficult for them to do that. So I thought I would spend just a little bit of time going over, so you can say you learned something new today. Okay. So some of the security features that are incorporated into the paper are the red and blue security fibers. Later they add watermarks, they embed security threads, and the Motion 3D security ribbon, which are in the 2004 style 100 Federal Reserve notes. There's 4 different types of inks used in genuine currency, including offset, intaglio, typographic, and then the optically variable ink, which is that shifting ink that you see. The currency is made in 2 locations, Washington, D.C. and Fort Worth, Texas. As we showed just a few minutes ago, this is the area where you can see the red and blue fibers on a bill from that era. And then as we come into the post-1990 time frame, I'm not sure if I'm left here, they start to add micro-printing and embedded security threads. So you can see some of the areas here where they're going to have some micro printing, and it says the United States of America around the edge of the portrait. And then these are the basic printing processes. So they use intaglio printing, that raised, and then there's typographic, like a typewriter, striking the paper. And they have some offset printing on there. And if you get a little earworm and or you need a special, what do they call these? A little trick to remember things, it's worm. There's watermarks, optical variable ink, red and blue fibers, micro printing, and security threads in the bills. And so here we have some examples of the optically varying ink in the bills, and if you notice on some of them that you have, if you shift it, it'll change. Again, we have the micro printing. So some examples of where that is. You also can feel on the bill, if you take your thumb and rake it over, the raised printing that's on the bills. On the $5 bill, here's an example of some of the micro printing, where it says $5 in that very decorative spots. Also in this portion of the $5 bill, bet you didn't know this, or maybe you did, but it says USA 5, USA 5. So many of these features, I'm gonna now just go through because we're getting short on time, but before you leave today, you can take one of these with you. It's called Know Your Money, and inside it has many of the features that we've talked about or hit on today, and what you can look at. So, nice little resource for you to protect yourself. About 1 in 40,000 bills, they say, is counterfeit. Of course, you increase your chances if you sell a car for cash, or you're doing a cash transaction. Let's say you're having a garage sale and someone comes to your garage sale and pays with a $100 bill. I take a look at that, especially if what they're buying is 50 cents. So, that might be what we call a clue, but just to be sure, you can now take out your paper clip and you can run your finger along and do some of the tests that we've shown you today.
Does that black, at the grocery store, does that black pen do the same thing as this does?
Okay, so the black pens are not something that is authorized or endorsed by the U.S. Secret Service. It's something private industry came up with as a means to detect or react to the sizing that is on the currency. So there's a special formula, and that can be one of the initial indicators that something's wrong if it turns black when they check it. And in that case, then that cashier or teller has to make a decision about how they're going to handle that situation, right? So, all right. This is just a little illustration of that 3D security thread. And I'm not sure if you guys can see how it changes on the bill to 100s, and the bills and hundreds move perpendicular to the tilt. So many people ask, where does all the counterfeit come from? Well, we get it from private citizens at a point of sale. The local banks get it, large banks get it. Some of our best detectors of it are the tellers who handle money every day, as you can imagine. Even the Federal Reserve Bank ends up getting counterfeit money back in their coffers sometimes. And then, of course, from our foreign country partners, and we'll get the counterfeiting, the currency from them. There's many different methods of counterfeiting. One is to bleach the currency, and then I don't know who's, I will say crazy enough to do this, but to bleach a dollar bill, and then they have to line it up just perfect in order to print a higher denomination over that bill. But you also then have to be able to simulate all those other security features in there, so it's a lot of work. And I think if you have that much time and go to that length of detail, maybe you can find a better job for yourself. So they'll bleach it, and then, like I said, they'll try and print over it. And this is an example where they bleached a $1 bill, and you can see barely the water print there. So it's still, the one is still there. And then they reprinted over it using probably an inkjet printer to make it a $100 bill. So, and as you can see, they can't duplicate the micro printing around the edge where it's supposed to say 100 USA. So there's lots of different little clues to look for. And I'm going to go through this somewhat fast because, again, I don't want to teach you all how to be counterfeiters. There's counterfeit security threads that people try to recreate. They might harvest it from another bill and then try to glue it or embed it into the counterfeit that they're making, peeling the paper apart and then placing it in there. Okay. We've also seen some motion picture money, some funny money, even in the local area, and then some foreign text notes. So these are things people should be on the lookout for. The foreign text notes will have the foreign characters somehow on here. These should be turned into your bank or your local police. And then also in the motion picture industry, of course, they make money for the movies, and they're supposed to put for motion picture use only, and it's supposed to be a different size, reduced down in size. But we have seen some of this pass as tips for people or people actually paying with it. And they'll usually target a young cashier at a busy place, and they'll hand that to them with the hopes that they won't notice. They'll take the bill and they're out the door before anyone is the wiser. Or they'll buy a pack of gum. So now we got to get back to our two bad guys. So I wanted to share a little bit with you about the day that they get arrested. Let's see. And this is the account from the Redwood Gazette on Thursday, September 21st. So it's about 8 days after the arrest takes place. And this will kind of give you an account of what happened. So I think Emil and William were on one of their weekend road trips. And their story was, I think, that they were heading to Kansas to talk to somebody about getting a brewery going in Sleepy Eye. So imagine that. And they stopped off because they needed some spending money, but also apparently some Barbasol shaving cream and some toothpaste, which eventually led to their demise. So, and I'm going to read this to you. It says 3 Brown County men were arrested Friday, September 13th by federal operatives and Mankato officials breaking up a counterfeiting gang whose racket had netted them thousands of dollars in the last 2 years. They have confessed. The prisoners are Raymond Marty, Emil and William Marty, a printer by trade who worked at Sleepy Eye and helped at the Gazette in Redwood on several occasions when help was needed 3 or 4 years ago. The Winklemans were reared north Springfield and are also known to many Redwood Falls persons. Marty was captured at New Richland because after Emil and William attempted to purchase their shaving cream and toothpaste, one of the shopkeepers, either very attuned to the fact that there was counterfeit out there, took the bill to the back because he said he had to go check and see if he had change. And while he was back there, he wrote down the serial numbers because they had gotten some sort of what we call a BOLO, be on the lookout for, flyer that listed the multiple serial numbers. So he wanted to make sure he wrote that down. Then he went back out and he told him, I'm sorry, I can't make change for you today. Maybe you can go down the street and talk to the other pharmacist. Meanwhile, he rings the other pharmacist to give him a warning, and he says, too late, I just sold shaving cream and toothpaste to another man who paid me with a $10 bill. And now that you mention it, it looks a little funny. So, with that, they called the city marshal of Monroe City, Alabama, or no, Missouri, right outside of Hannibal, Missouri, and he made the local arrest. And then, as often the case, they're held there, and then the local Secret Service office operatives would come down on the scene and kind of take over the federal investigation from there. So in this case, they would have come from St. Louis. And then they said that their plant, they totally confessed, and they said that their plants were in Mankato, Minnesota at the home of Emil Winkleman and Raymond Marty. So they got search warrants and raids on the Marty and Winkleman homes in Mankato. They seized more than $37,000 worth of partly finished and finished counterfeit bills in $10 denominations. They had 15 copper plates, 3 presses, volumes of lithographic literature, an elaborate photographic plant, and hundreds of bottles and cans of engraving and photographic materials were also confiscated. The arrests were the result of a 2-year hunt over 6 Midwest states by a dozen Secret Service men who had trailed the gang since the first bogus bill was passed in 1931. Emil Winkleman, 36, operated a bank in Essig until it closed in June of 1932. His brother William, about 40 years of age, was a cashier at a bank in Searles until that bank closed. Marty was the commercial artist. The three had known each other before locating at Mankato. So Grady Boatwright, the chief of the Secret Service in St. Paul, said the gang manufactured the bills on weekends and cashed them during the week, traveling by motor through southern Minnesota, Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, Missouri, and the Dakotas. They make small purchases at grocery stores, gasoline stations, and drugstores. Also, another clue, they come in and they buy a pack of gum, and so they get the max amount of change possible back. When Boatwright and another operative and the sheriff secured search warrants from the U.S. Commissioner Raymond Hughes, they proceeded to North Mankato to the addresses for Marty and Winkleman. The house was surrounded and the officers demanded admittance. Before opening the door, however, Mrs. Marty attempted vainly to raise the bathroom window in an apparent effort to hide a black case on the roof. She failed to open it, but was seen by Chief Henry, so he knew something was amiss. After admitting the searchers, the warrant was served and a search of the place ensued. The first discovery was made in the garage where vari-colored inks and parts of printing forms and 3 rolls from a hand press and about 400 sheets of paper the size of new bills were found. In a bed occupied by a 4-year-old child, operatives found a black case because she couldn't get it on the roof, so she hid it in her child's bed, containing 15 copper die plates. Mrs. Marty then admitted she had secreted them there following her failure to open the window. That led them to look up in the attic, where they discovered 3 one-gallon glass jars, 2 of which were jammed with $1,500 bills each in $10 denominations, and the third held 687 bills of like size. They were hidden in the rafters, and 2 were hidden in a discarded water tank. They also found a box containing $7,200 worth of bills at the home of the Winkleman's aged mother in Springfield. She would not believe they were guilty, until the discovery was made. And according to the officers, Mrs. Marty, back to Mankato, admitted knowledge of the operations and declared she had pleaded with her husband repeatedly to quit the business. She said, "It's been nothing but grief here ever since has come out of this whole thing," she's quoted as saying. So, let's see. They got word that Marty was in New Richmond, Minnesota, and so they sent word there and took off to go find him. They had the license plate numbers and description of his vehicles, and they were able to locate him in the evening and took him into custody. And on his person, he had 21 bogus $10 bills, so he was taken to the Mankato jail immediately. Now, Marty had a wife, whom you've heard about, and 4 children, the youngest 4 months old. And Emil Winkleman has 2 children, the youngest 6 months old. William, of course, was unmarried, as we mentioned, and Mrs. Winkleman admitted the operations had been carried on for about a year. But she said, what were we to do? Emil had no job, and we had to live. So, the gang manufactured only $10 bills and made 6 kinds. 5 were national banknotes, and 1 was the Sioux Falls, South Dakota banknote that had the gold certificate on it. Let's see. Operative Boatwright said, "Many times we almost caught up with them. Our only chance on appearance of bills was to go to a town, probably in the itinerary of the passer, and wait there in the hope of apprehending them." Operatives with descriptions of the 3 men spent hours waiting on street corners of small towns, and here's where I'm from the government and I'm here to help comes in sleet and snow and the hot summer. They waited for one of them to appear. They traveled thousands of miles on buses and railroads and interviewed hundreds of merchants who had been victimized by this. And in modern day times, we usually see when we apprehend someone and they're charged with the felony of passing counterfeit currency, that they're ordered to pay restitution to every victim that we as the investigators can identify. So at least there's some sort of restitution for them. Passage of one counterfeit bill carries a penalty of 15 years imprisonment, just one, 15 years and a $5,000 fine. And conviction of manufacturing carries the same penalty. So this could make the men liable to sentences many times the length of their own lives. So now we move forward, and I know I'm getting really close here. They are arrested, they're in custody. It takes a while for the whole process to come to fruition. Not only are they charged in Minnesota, but then later they get charged in St. Louis. So this is a copy of what an operative would carry. It's his pocket memoranda, and he would write down on here the name of the arrestee, when arrested, where, for what, by whom, name of the party furnishing the information, and then when they got indicted, which was January 11th, 1935, after being arrested on the 15th. Well, this is for the St. Louis portion of their crimes, so not as big a gap as one would think. In their first trial, Emil got 3 years in Leavenworth and a $500 fine. William got 3 years at Leavenworth, a $500 fine. And then when they go to trial in St. Louis, Emil gets another 3 years, and William gets another 1.5 years. Raymond Marty, who seems to be a lot more involved in this than what his sentence would lead us to believe, gets 2 years in Leavenworth and a $500 fine. I could not find a record regarding the additional sentencing from St. Louis. And I just was going to share with you, these are great articles from the local newspapers, but because Raymond Marty had worked for the Sleepy Eye Herald, they wrote a nice little letter on his behalf appealing for a lesser charge, and talked about how he worked from him, that hours meant nothing to him. If the work was finished at 6, all's well and good, he goes home. If not, he comes back after the evening meal and works just as hard or as long as necessary. So his interest in Pride was as great as if it were his own newspaper, and he watched its growth with eyes that sparkled with each new accomplishment. So a lot of progress was made by the paper during the first year or two with Ray's help and those of the owners who were literally strangers new to the community. A few years later, and this is where Fairfax came in, when Ray was determined to enter business for himself, he and the writer attempted to buy the Fairfax Standard. We talked about that. Here it says, just wanted to say, punishment must follow such actions. We know, and there is nothing to be gained in trying to prevent it. However, it is our heartfelt hope that the court deal leniently with him, and it is our sincere belief that when he has ended whatever sentence is given, he will take up the threads of life that were broken when he left Sleepy Eye and use the talents that his Creator gave him, so that his life and influence will again be such as to be a help and comfort to his family and fellow man. So that was written by one of the editors at the Sleepy Eye paper on his behalf in a hope for him to get a lenient sentence. And then just to tell you the maximum penalty, if Marty had been charged based on his own admission on how many bills he had passed, he would have served 26,000 years and paid a fine of over $1 million. So under the law, the government had the right to treat it as separate crime in the manufacturing, passing, and possession of each bogus bill. Likewise, William Winkleman would have been sentenced to at least 12,000 years in prison, and his brother would have also gotten 12,000 years for the manufacturing charges. So this was quite the caper that they managed to pull off. And I always like to know, well, what happened to him? And as we mentioned, I found that AMO, because the Secret Service would follow up on its counterfeiters, actually had applied for a job to be an electrical worker in the Twin Cities. And he listed on his application that he had learned his trade in the Leavenworth Penitentiary. But this wasn't alarming because he did get hired as an electrician. And then that was 1942, and then in 1945 we find that he is living with his wife in South Minneapolis and is employed as an electrician by the local electric company. So the second career has stuck. See, there's hope. So, all right, I promised a quiz, and it'll be brief. I wanted to ask, first off, and you have to raise your hand, no shouting. What year was the Secret Service established? You gotta raise your hand.
Yes.
Terry?
1865.
Okay, bingo, you win this very nice Secret Service lapel flag pin. Congratulations. Wear it proudly on your German badge. And then, secondly, raise your hand. What is the most commonly passed counterfeit U.S. currency? Oh my gosh. I didn't even see it. I'm gonna go with Pam. 20s. Yes, you were right. So congratulations, you get one too. And I'm picking on Pam a little because as I first moved back to Minnesota and my mother was at Oak Hills, it was during COVID. And Pam had the thankless job some days of having to be head of security for Oak Hills as well. And so she would put everyone who came in through the paces, take your temperature and sanitize your hands and do all the things you needed to do. And one day I went to Candace Schuweiler, the administrator, and also a former high school classmate, and said, boy, I'd hire Pam to work at the White House. No one did pass her. So, anyways, I can take questions. I know that you guys were over our time, but I'm happy to entertain any questions. And if you need to leave, please just go, head out quietly. But you in the back row.
First of all, during my college years, I dated a girl from Fairfax, and I know why you're Secret Service. She would not allow any shenanigans. My question to you is this. If I innocently come into possession of a good counterfeit bill, and I decide I'm going to keep it to show it off, I have no intention of ever passing it. I want to keep it as a curiosity item to show to my friend Jerry. Is that legal?
No, I would highly recommend against it, because remember, possession is a federal crime. So
One last
possession-
question.
Yeah.
On my dollar bills, it always says, this is legal tender for any debt, public or private. But I go so many places nowadays that won't take cash. Are they breaking the law?
No, they shouldn't be, but I think a business has the right to choose if they're going to accept cash or not, or if they're only going to do credit card transactions. If you suspect that you ever have a counterfeit bill, please take it to one of your local banks. They're receive some sort of training, and more than anybody else probably in town, they've handled the currency. Or take it to the police
But I
department.
won't be reimbursed, will
No. But you're gonna feel good. You did the right thing. Okay, I saw another hand up. I'll go here and then I'll come over there. Yes.
I'm just curious why there's such a gap, 1929 to 1990. They didn't do anything. Is it just because of the changes in technology that everybody had by 1990 where people were passing better counterfeit?
So I think it's the advent of the computers that required them to step it up to the next level. And probably, our dollars are accepted all around the world, right? And they've held their own. But now, some other state actors start to get involved in running U.S. currency. And later, which can be a whole nother presentation, something called the supernote comes into existence. So, yes.
Julie, I have a question about is the Secret Service staying ahead of the next potential currency for America, which is cryptocurrency? How are they staying ahead of counterfeiting of potentially cryptocurrency?
So I'm not a subject matter expert on this. All I know is that we have a group in our criminal investigative division that is wholly focused on cryptocurrency. They have taken down several bad actors, mostly overseas, and I would say the best thing probably is to follow them on Facebook and Instagram, or go to their website and read more about what they're doing specifically. But because I know you personally, Don, I'll do a little research and follow up.
Because a lot of people are saying that potentially our dollar will not be there.
It could
in
be
the next
devalued by,
a long time, not that long from now. And
Yeah.
that's why cryptocurrency might be the next thing.
Right.
And so how are we going to be able to recognize illegal?
yeah, and so that's a whole nother subject, like I said, that I haven't, my generation on the job, I didn't receive that training, but you can see where we're headed. So many of us love the convenience of Uber Eats. I see it especially, out east in Virginia, on college campuses. Nobody pays with cash anymore.
Yeah.
Yet they wonder how people know, what they're spending and how they're targeted for certain advertisement. Well,
Right.
it's not the government tracking you, my friends. It's your own purchases and
Yeah.
social media and all the algorithms that go along with it. So, Jerry,
You talked a little bit about the micro printing.
yeah?
Don't I remember that years ago on the picture of the White House, that all of the states in the Union were micro printed on the colonnade of the White House?
No, not to my knowledge, and I have a top secret clearance, but I can tell you, on the Lincoln Memorial, if you've been there, around the facade of it is all the different states are listed on there. So maybe that's what you're thinking of, but I can definitely do some follow-up and confirm.
Well, the Lincoln Memorial has never been on the bill, has it?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's on the file.
Is it on the back of the 5?
Yeah, and you can see the states.
I don't know what sort
Oh,
of.
well, there we go. Who
Well,
said
it's
that?
on this.
Yeah, I know that. I remember that.
Well, there you go. I must have been sleeping that All right. Okay, any other questions? Yes,
Is
ma'am.
the paper money the only thing that should be counterfeited?
No, coins have been counterfeited as well. Yeah. So I'm just waiting to see, we've heard it in the news, it costs more now to make a penny than a penny's worth, so how much longer will they have pennies around? And I'm wondering then when nickels will be next, or how that's gonna go. But yeah. Yes, sir.
Abel Winkleman was a kid. And after they were arrested in 1934, they came out and helped my dad plant corn because the farm they were on belonged to his mother. In 1938, he was working for a local electrician in Springfield when REA came in.
Okay. Well, there you go. Now we know what happened to them. Any other questions? I can answer. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have any idea why they didn't get a harsher sentence?
The judge, and I didn't want to take the time, but the judge addresses the court and it's documented in a newspaper article. And before passing judgment, the court addressed the defendants and said, here are 3 men raised apparently from good families, right? Who for some reason or other have brought a great deal of misery and suffering on themselves as well as is always the case on the innocent. 2 of these men I expect were trusted by the directors and stockholders of the bank. They were highly regarded in their communities. The other, Marty, has spent a long period of time in newspaper work. 2 have taken on the responsibility of marriage and children. 1 of these bankers and the newspaper man developed the idea of making a counterfeit money. So the judge is speaking to the court about them, the impact on the community. And then it says here, Counterfeiting long has been frowned upon by Congress. And then he quotes, "No private citizen has any right to attempt to impair or degenerate the integrity of the currency system of our land by any means or conditions, the effect of which is to issue spurious money. If carried to any degree, it is easy to see where we could land with reference to our currency system. So it is merely for the purpose of punishing those guilty of the infraction that I have described these laws. So, for the purpose of acting as a deterrent to others," he said here, "I cannot conceive of the emotions or mental makeup of men, who will go to the front line as a soldier in defense of our country and our government, and then turn around and conduct as nefarious and base an attack at the rear of the government as has been done in this case." So he's reading this out loud for everybody in court, or saying this. He said, "I know and I sense that all of you have suffered a great deal. However, this court cannot be swayed by such emotions, and I have taken a solemn obligation to do my duty. The laws are here, society must be protected." I think he really had a hard time with, looking at the whole plight of the situation. Many mouths to feed. It was the 30s, the banks had crashed. They both worked at banks. I'm not saying any of that makes it right, but I think that was probably part of what was taken into account. Because certainly, the sentence could have been much harsher. Any other questions? Well, I thank you all. This has been a lot of fun for me. I was very nervous. My voice was cracking like a young, 12-year-old going through puberty, but I appreciate you hanging in there with me.